What is up, my friends? It is Murderink here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today we are going over the new team that I made called Infinity Chaos. Why is it called Infinity Chaos? Because you're going to find out very quickly as I'm explaining this team how it's simply unethical. There's no standard speed tuning, which may sound confusing because everything has a speed tuning. This simply has a minimum speed, and pretty much that's it. You just go from there. Some gear sets are required, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the champions first. Now, bear with me here. I'm going to be getting the high-end showcase out of the way, showing you the best possible team to run this so the filthy whales can be happy with their new teams. Then I'm going to show you the substitutes you can swap in, but more importantly, after this video, I'm actually going to substitute some of the champions in that are more accessible to every single player and show videos on it so people actually understand how you can use them and how it's always going to be better than the Bat Eater team. So with that being said, let's talk about the 5 champions that make this team pure chaos. So we're using 2 Lanicus today, which a champion that honestly hasn't gotten a lot of play in the clan boss scene. Outside of 2 Lanicus, we will be using Krisk the Ageless, followed by Dracomorph, and finally Underpriest Brogni. Now all of these champions together and combined create this team, which is going to be the building blocks for the greatest team that Raid has ever seen, uncontested, because as I mentioned in my previous video, this is going to work on any affinity, any difficulty, and the speed and execution of this team is absolutely incredible, and the speed requirements for this team is lower than Bat Eater. So there's a lot going on here, so we just gotta jump straight into it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you the setup of this team, because that's very important. The speeds that I used in this team specifically isn't as important as what you're going to be looking for in the setup. Now this is completely auto from the start. You don't have to set anything up besides the preset AI if you are using these champions. So with that being said, let's kind of take a look at this run here and exactly what's going on. So what we're going to see is Krisk first is going to apply the increased speed. Lanicus is going to use her A3 ability that gives attack up and increased crit rate. Brogni is going to provide block debuff and his small shield. The second Lanicus is going to be using her A2, which increases the buffs and ally attacks. After that, you have Dracomorph doing the defense down and weaken. Now this is the key here. After we see all of those abilities, Krisk is never going to use that increased speed again. Lanicus is never going to use the attack up and the increased crit rate, and Brogni is never going to use his A3. So you're going to be locking those specific skills out on 4 of the champions. Both Lanicus will have no use for the A3 outside of the first one. Krisk will never use increased speed outside of that first turn, and Brogni is never going to use his A3 outside of his first turn. So once you have that, the only thing you have to know about this, I guess, speed, I don't even want to call it speed tune, speed order here, is you need to make sure the Lanicus that's extending all of the buffs is in the speed order after the first Lanicus, Krisk, and Underpriest Brogni. After that, there's nothing else to say here. So as you can see here, we're starting off this run here. Everything just happened already, being at this first turn, and now this is where things just completely scale infinitely, which is why it is called the Infinity team. Now the chaos part comes into because, like I said, there's no real speed tuning here. This team is built with full damage. So I'm going to show you the stats on all of these champions here, and you guys are going to be shocked at the amount of defense I'm running on these teams. Maybe not so much, as we can see the shield is already absolutely massive already. So this team actually has no consistent attack down. You may be able to see the attack down on the screen now. However, if you know Krisk, he only applies it for 1 turn. So every time there is going to be a stun, once we get to the later rounds here, the team's going to be unprotected with attack down on that first AoE, especially on Void Affinity and non-Void Affinity. You're going to notice right away how they're just not taking any damage. So this is what makes this team so strong, and why it was so cool to play around with this team to figure out how to make it the fastest possible. So with that being said, what are the times that I have to show you today? Well, let's get right into the pictures that I do have of all of the affinities outside of red. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a red affinity key for this video, but based on how Bat Eater works, based on the percentages and calculating the chance of not critting, landing debuffs, all of the weak hit stuff, I can give you an estimated time and your mind's going to be blown. So first off, we're going to start with Blue Affinity. The average time for Blue Affinity is going to be 7 minutes and 8 seconds with this team. Now that's fast. Next, moving on to Green Affinity, where you can see there's obvious synergy here. We got this down to an incredible 6 minute and 23 second one key. Picture that for a second. Think of all of that beautiful spare time you're going to have to do anything you want. 6 minutes and 23 seconds. So beautiful. Next, this brings us to Void Affinity, which I'm sure a lot of people are worried about since Brogni doesn't perform as well in Void Affinity. Fear not. My screenshot here, as we can see, 7 minutes and 8 seconds on Void Affinity, so there's nothing to worry about here. Another question you might be asking is, Murder, I do like the fast teams, but I'm also a player that likes to min-max things to the highest level. So with a glass cannon team like I have here, we can simply skip ahead all the way through the fight here, and we're going to see that I made it 73 rounds with, literally, you're going to see the stats, a laughable amount of defense with attack down falling constantly, and the final damage we got on Blue Affinity in 22 minutes and 18 seconds was 185.11 million damage. Now that's quite incredible because most glass cannon teams do not survive this long. It's, like I said earlier in the video, simply unethical. You would just never see this. And the fact that I'm using Krisk Leader, I have no valuable aura to use, it's just even crazier. So this is why there's so much potential for different champions to be swapped in here as you guys need. Now what I want to do is I do want to show you the specific AI configuration that I am using for all of these champions here. So as we can see here, if you just follow this, if you are running this exact team here, you're going to be pretty much set. All you have to do is make the team setup. It doesn't really matter who the leader is. Under Priest, Brogni is most likely going to get stunned each time. And while we are going over this, I can also mention the overall stats of the champions. I will show you the gear sets they're using. So just to start with Krisk, we have 60,000 health, 4.7,000 defense, 261 speed. He's going to be the highest speed here. 97 crit rate, which is way too much crit rate. My gear just wasn't good enough at the time. 159 crit damage, 231 accuracy. Accuracy, once again, I found out later on after min-maxing, you don't need accuracy on Krisk because there's zero chance that Clan Boss can kill your team based on the amount of shields being applied to your team to hit a 1 key in any affinity. It's just impossible. So you don't need attack down at all. So that's a huge benefit going forward with this team here. Now the reason why Krisk is so fast here, he's the fastest member. Krisk has to be 25%-ish faster than the remaining 4 champions. Why is that? If you do know how Krisk the Ageless kit works, he applies increased speed to everybody but himself. So with that, you do have to compensate for that speed difference there. So this is the only, I guess, downside of the team. He does have to be faster, but 261 is on the high end. There is a much lower speed threshold that I will go over once I finish showing you the exact speeds for this video. Now, if you are one of those filthy whales I was talking about in the beginning, I highly recommend following my speeds. Pretty close, doesn't have to be that close, but this is kind of the peak that I found because this is the highest my gear let me do, building the max amount of damage, the max amount of speed, and you don't have to worry about survivability, accuracy on any champions you do see fit to run accuracy on, but that is what we're going out here. So if anything isn't working, this is a very, very easy team to self-diagnose. You're going to know right away which debuff's falling, which debuff isn't falling. If it rarely happens on a champion, you're going to say, okay, this champion is going way too fast for my team. What do I do about it? You make that champion slower, as long as you keep in mind the early setup for this team. Now that we went over Krisk, let's talk about Under Priest Brogni. In this team, he's running 228 speed, so that's something to keep in mind. 77 crit rate, 250 crit damage, accuracy. We don't care about accuracy on this champion. The increased attack from any affinity is going to be irrelevant for him, as well as the HP burn. We don't really care about that too much. We can see his attack here is 3.8 thousand, HP and defense do not matter at all. So the main key here is 228 speed. Next we have our first Lanicus the Chosen, also at 228 speed. This is the slow one. I am paraphrasing because we do have 2 here. So this is equal speed with Under Priest Brogni here. 3.8 attack, 225 crit damage, 78% crit rate. Rest of the stats don't matter. So this one will be leading with that extend buff. Moving on to the next Lanicus here, we have the one starting with the A3. This is going to be the fast one. She has 235 speed, 4.4 thousand attack, 206 crit damage, and 83 crit rate. Finally, moving on to our powerhouse champion, Dracomorph. Dracomorph is going to be the key here because, as we've mentioned before, he is the best overall champion in the game for any single affinity. He doesn't hit the target to apply that defense down and weaken. He has a lot of poison, so the probability of him weak hitting everything is very low, and he has a insanely hard hitting A1. So his speed is actually able to be the lowest on this team, as low as 212. You can actually go all the way down to 206 speed, but I'm going to give that overview later, so it's easy for you guys to kind of formulate your teams from what the lowest thresholds are and kind of the margin you should keep all of your champions in. So he has 5.6 thousand attack, 284 crit damage, 72 crit rate, and once again 212 speed, followed by 238 accuracy. A little bit on the low side, but that can definitely be improved by a lot of you when replicating this team. So now that we talked about the preset AI and the basic setup of the champions, let's go ahead and go over the gear sets I'm using on these champions. Now for this specific clip I'm showing you here, I had Chris the Ageless in a shield set. Now you do not need a shield set, let me repeat, you do not need a shield set for this team. What's happening here is Krisk's passive as well as Under Priest Brogni A3, they share the same code, let's say, for a shield. A shield set is going to be different, so that's 2 shields. Now I have made a video in the past showing that there is a shield cap in this game and it cannot go higher than that. What this allows you to do is it allows you to pretty much extend 2 shields to let you get to that number I showed you before, 175 million damage. This is going to be irrelevant if you are looking for a speed team, the fastest you could possibly get with this type of comp. So 261 speed, like I said, in a shield set gear is not easy at all. But like I said, you do not need this if you're going for the fastest team ever. Build him with the proper amount of speed you need for your team and pure damage. That's all that matters, because 1 shield is going to be enough simply with all of the extensions going on to survive to that 1 key and well beyond 100 million damage. So this is more for the kind of hardcore players who really want to push this. Maybe have someone like a Lydia instead of a Dracomorph if you want to survive an insane amount of turns. With that strengthen now, it will lower the speed requirement because Lydia provides increased speed for everybody, so Chris doesn't have to be as fast. You can build him tankier. He's the one that's going to die first, of course, because he has ally protection on all of the champions here. So that's kind of why you see the initial thought process here with Chris in a shield set, but you don't need this at all. Moving on to Under Priest Brogni, this is going to be an interesting champion to talk about. I've seen a lot of people running him reflex gear, and I'm really not sure why. So I do understand the fact that repeating the A2 is going to be extremely strong. However, one thing I think people are kind of overlooking is how hard Under Priest Brogni hits. So as we can see here, I have him in 3 sets of cruel gear. Now if you remember, and I know I've talked about this, it's probably been a while, so I'll remind everybody about Under Priest Brogni. He has an amazing passive with this shield that can proc Giant Slayer. Now what does Cruel do? Cruel ignores defense. Ignore defense in the clan boss does nothing to the defense, but it increases mastery damage. Now mastery damage is Under Priest Brogni's main source of damage. Now the average mastery hit or Under Priest Brogni gets increased all the way to 70,000 per hit with 3 sets of Cruel, which is incredible. There's no possible way Reflex can kind of overcompensate for that with whatever it was trying to do. And as we can see here, this does work fine without reflex gear. The key here is building him with as much damage as you possibly can with cruel gear. If you want to use savage gear is fine as well. It will bring his mastery damage all the way up to 72,000 damage per hit. Now savage is used in a lot of champions, so you might not have the set with the speed you want and the damage you want to use on this champion. I'm not really sure if it's going to be better than using 3 sets of Cruel, because you do get an awesome attack bonus, and the base attack for Brogni is quite low. I think we all know that. So that is something to consider there, but this is why I definitely recommend using Cruel gear or Savage gear over Reflex. I think it's actually useless using Reflex gear because the damage alone, unless you have an amazing Reflex damage set. It sounds like a very hard set to come by, since reflex gear is kind of uncommon now since no one's really been using it for a long time outside of maybe Bad L. But if you have a spare one lying around, you can put it on him as long as it has a very high damaging stats, because under Priest Brockney hits very hard and all of that damage absolutely adds up because he's the slowest animation character on the team. Now, one kind of sidebar that I'm going to kind of talk about is all of these champions were picked not only because of what they bring as far as output, but because of their animations. Lanicus animation is incredibly fast. Frisk is unfortunately slow, but I had to use him here. Under Priest Brockney, once again, is slow, but I had to use him. And Dracomorph, we all know how fast Dracomorph is. He doesn't run up to the boss. He has a hard-hitting quick A1, a very quick A2, and a quick A3, making him an ideal champion as the damage dealer here. So moving on to our fast Lanicus here, she's going to be the first champion here wearing reflex gear. Now, as I said before, reflex isn't a common gear set, so you better get Ice Golem farming for sure. Now, this is strictly for min-maxing purposes. I gave her as much damage as I possibly could. You don't have to do this. You don't have to crit cap her. You don't have to give her attack, crit damage. I did this simply to make the fastest team possible. If you're extremely endgame with very good gear, you're going to want to do this. It's going to lower your time significantly. Her A1's hitting for me from 80 to 100,000 each, which is definitely a lot of damage that adds up very quickly. But like I said, you don't need to do this. You're still going to have a faster team than any team you have if you can replicate this. And as you can probably guess, moving on to the second Lanicus, she is also using reflex gear. This is in fact key for her. Now, a lot of people are going to be asking, what about refresh accessories? You can run them. It's not going to hurt you at all since you're disabling the A3, so there's no danger of the extra turn overburning through the buffs here, but it's not needed. I've done it on every single difficulty so far. I've done probably, I want to say 70 or 80 keys in the past 2 days because I've had to kill clan boss on my own in the test server where I did make these trial runs, and it never failed without refresh gear. Refresh gear is going to, I guess, help you in your final turns per minute, which is an interesting thing we're going to talk about in a little bit. However, you don't need it, but it has a benefit. Now, one thing I do recommend while gearing Lanicus, if you're an endgame player and you want to min-max, do not give her a crit damage necklace. I did not on any champion. You want to make sure she has a flat attack necklace with crit damage because she's kind of a harder champion to get flat attack on because you are using reflex gear. Unless you have godly reflex gear, then go ham, get that attack up, get that crit damage up. Moving on here to the powerhouse final champion of the day, we have Dracomorph. He is also wearing 3 sets of cruel gear. We have high attack, crit damage. Could it be min-max better? Probably. I didn't want to spend too much time on this guy. He's pretty self-explanatory and straightforward. You just want to build him with full damage. I wouldn't go savage gear here. If you want to go speed set, anything else, obviously something like Fury isn't going to work out. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is going to be the masteries for all of these champions. You have a lot of freedom with the masteries here. Alright guys, so now let's talk about masteries because this is where it can get pretty interesting and there's something I need to make sure people understand first. For most of the champions, anyone that uses War Master, this is what your offense tree is going to look like. If you're using Giant Slayer, of course you're going to head straight on over to Giant Slayer. Now the next part of this doesn't really matter what you do. You pretty much want to find anything beneficial to you as long as it's not messing up your speed team. So something that I did in a lot of champions was I used this just to get an extra boost in accuracy. If a champion has debuffs, someone like a Dracomorph, I used Arcane Celerity for boosting the turn meter once the debuff expires because it's very important that Dracomorph has a chance to use his defense down and weaken pretty early on into the run. So regardless of where the turn meters are, since all of the speeds are relatively close together, it's important, and you probably saw when the team was going how the turn order actually does happen. So once you use Arcane Celerity, once his poisons are expiring, his turn meter will just shoot up to the top and he will use that defense down and weaken first each round ideally. Sometimes there's one champion that cuts in. It's fine, it's not a huge loss there. I would then go Lore of Steel here. It does change the speeds a bit, but if you take Lore of Steel on every single champion, everything stays linear if you are using a speed set. Outside of that, you can go with Master Hexer. I tested this with Dracomorph. Don't worry, it's not going to overcap the debuffs. You won't run into any problems of missing a defense down on a weekend, so this is something that can be possible. After that, just use whatever. Probably wouldn't use Cycle of Magic unless you use the priority system I did, where he's always using his A3 over his A2. You could get unlucky and reduce the cooldown enough with Cycle of Magic, although it's very unlikely, and double poison the boss, making it kind of hard if Krisk's attack down does land by accident to get defense down on weekend. Not a huge deal, but I probably wouldn't take it anyways just to be safe. I would probably just go something like this and call it a day. So with that being said, you're not going to go defense tree, no one's getting stunned. You don't really want Cycle of Revenge. That can mess quite a few things up. You're never going to be using Retribution, you're never going to be using Deterrence, so this is kind of the tree that I would use personally. Now, looking at someone like Lanicus and Krisk, I think in theory, I don't think I've seen this happen. There's been so many runs. I haven't been paying 100% attention, but Rapid Response could proc on the continuous heals from these champions. The core 6 buffs will be on everybody. Those will be extended from the start, so don't worry about that. But if you wanted to get a little bit extra turn meter and maybe it won't mess up your team, that's perfectly fine. So after going over this, the final thing to talk about here is Murder. What are we doing with speed tuning? So take my champions and use them as a rough guide. Now with that being said, the lowest speed you ever want to go is 206 speed. So you want your slowest champion, whether it being a damage dealer, whatever you want, whatever your Dracomorph equivalent is, 206 speed. And after that, everyone else can be relatively close to each other. I would say between 10 speed, so 206 to 216 speed. Like I said, I named it Infinity Chaos for a reason. There's no real right or wrong way, and as explained, you're going to find out within the first, I guess, 5 seconds of the fight whether or not you did it right. If the setup works properly, you have all of the buffs on, and by turn, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6, if everything's on and consistent, you're going to be fine. There's going to be no issues there. However, if you do see that one of your shields drop, increased speed drops on anybody, that's when you're going to have to say, who did it drop on? Because it is going to be extending on every other champion, and that's the champion that needs fixing. It's always going to work that way, so keep that in mind. So like I said, at 206 speed the lowest, the highest you can build even higher speeds than I have here today. Like I said, this is just the max damage and speed I can put out with the gear I have access to on my account. If you have better gear on your account, use it. Just keep them all tight-knit within a certain speed threshold. If one champion that's not Krisk has like 300 speed, it's not going to work. It's just going to overlap. They're going to outrun their buffs, and it's not going to be endless. So keep that in mind. Like I said, it's a very relaxed. There's no very strict, this champion has to be 261, this champion has to be 228. Honestly, this wouldn't be the best clan boss in the entire game if that was the case. Now, a lot of you, if you stuck with me through this video, you're saying, Murder, that's great, but I don't have 2 Lanicus, Krisk, Dracomorph, or Underpriest Brogni. If that's literally the case, then you're out of luck. You can't build this. All you really need for this team is Underpriest Brogni. He's the only required champion. So who can use instead? Off the top of my head, don't take this like 100%, but this is what I can think about. I've used Flesh Terror. Flesh Terror works perfectly fine instead of Lanicus. There's a rare, I believe, Valerie who extends buffs. You can use her instead of Lanicus. You can use Sandlash Survivor. You can use Godseeker and Neri. There's so many possibilities for non-Lanicus champions to be inserted into this team. Now, what if you don't have a Krisk? If you don't have a Krisk, you do need an increased speed champion. If not, your team speed requirements are going to be way too high for this to be considered a realistic team, so you definitely don't want that. The best champion that you could use in this case is going to be someone like a Lydia for where Dracomorph is. That's going to significantly reduce the amount of damage you're doing. You're still going to get 11-12 minute keys, so that's not a huge deal, but that also frees up another spot for who's in Krisk's spot. So if I was going to replicate this team, I can get the same results using someone like Lydia, Underpriest Brogni, let's say Flesh Terror, Valerie, Godseeker, and Neri. Bam. We have all the champions we need. It's going to work flawlessly as long as you have 2 reflex sets and you're following that rough speed threshold and no one's an outlier in speed. For a team like that, like I said, very important. Without Krisk, you do not need anyone 25% faster. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but I want to make sure people realize that. And like I said, I am going to be building in-depth videos on other team comps using that rare, using those epic champions, so people can actually see the possibilities, see the results for themselves if they are struggling making this team, which it's pretty easy to build, being honest with you. There's so much freedom with the speeds you can use. The speeds are not high at all. You're not using 230, 240, 267 speed for just any normal team like you would need with Bat Eater. You can do, like I said, 206 speed, and if you do have Lydia, 206 speed to 209 speed, and you're done. That's all you need. 206 speed, 209 speed, everyone nice and neat in between. I guess that small threshold, it could be higher, like I already said, 216, but after that, hit auto, everything easy. Alright guys, so that's going to conclude my video today on the Infinity Chaos. If you like this content, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, and I will see you all in my next upload.